And the man playing our next historical figure that you're going to meet was a very, very famous man indeed. Geoffrey Chaucer. And here we see him from a manuscript portrait by Thomas Hoccleve, 1412. Geoffrey Chaucer was born in circa 1343 and died on the 25th of October 1400. He was an English poet, writer and civil servant, best known for the Canterbury Tales. He has been called the father of English literature, or alternatively, the father of English poetry. He was the first writer to be buried in what has since become known as Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey. So that's our intro to Geoffrey Chaucer, and you're going to join me within St Margaret's Church now, where he'll tell us about where the bee got its sting from, and he'll tell us then after that the story of King Arthur. So join me inside the church.
She made some honey, and this honey was the best honey she'd ever made. And she put the honey into an acorn and carried it all the way to Mount Olympus. Now, Mount Olympus is quite a climb if you're a person, but if you're a bee, it's a very long way. And if you're a bee carrying an acorn cup full of honey, the same size you are, this was a honeybee, you're a bumblebee, well, it's a very long way and a very hard journey indeed. But by the time she got there, past all the trees, past the rivers, past the bare rock, through the cloud, up to Mount Olympus itself, she saw she was surrounded by ivory and gold. And there, seated in the centre on a great golden throne, was Jupiter. Jupiter, the king of the Roman gods. Jupiter, a man, a god, who really liked sitting on big golden thrones and people telling him how great he was. The bee flew herself over there, gently placed the acorn cup on the ground and said, "Mighty Zeus, I bring you a gift." And Zeus looked around, he sort of heard something but couldn't quite make out what it was. He sort of plucked the wax out of his ears, because he's very big and the bee's very little. And the bee said again, in the biggest voice she could, mighty Jupiter, I bring you a gift." And he looked around and eventually spotted the little bee down there with a little cup of acorn. "It is the greatest honey that I've ever made, great Jupiter, and I brought it as a gift for you." And well, Jupiter, if you know two things about him, the first is that he's not very good at being a husband, but the second is he's got a sweet tooth. So he reached down and he took a little bit of the honey and went, "Oh, that is really good honey." And just for a moment he thought, "I should probably share that with my wife," and then he finished it. And he said, "Little bee, that was the best honey I've ever had, and I've had a lot of honey. You've given me a gift, I must give you a gift in return. What gift would you like?" "Oh," said the bee, "I'm hoping for advice, but a gift would be even better. Mighty Zeus, many times our homes are destroyed, my sisters, my brethren are driven away from our hives, and our honey is taken. Mighty Jupiter, give us a way to defend our homes." Now, at this, Jupiter was a bit troubled, because, well, he just promised the bee that he'd give her a gift, whatever she asked for. And Jupiter, happy enough going back on his word, but not where people might hear. But also, he's one of those people that would go and take the bee's honey. So this seems like potentially a double-edged sword. Well, this is also a time when he was not at war with his wife, Juno. So he went to get her advice. Now, Juno, as you probably know, she's the goddess of the home and the family and of love. And so she thought it was quite a good idea to have these bees be able to defend their homes and their families and the thing that they'd spent a long time making so that they could make it through the winter. And she said, "Well, why don't you give them a weapon? But make it so it's tied to their lives so they won't draw it in war, only in times of utter peril." And Jupiter said, "Do you know what, that's a really good idea I've had. I've got this, it's a nice idea, but my idea is better. I'm going to give them a weapon they can use to defend themselves, but not to do war. Brilliant, I'm a genius." And he went to the bee and he said, "Bee, I have a dagger. This dagger will be sheathed within your body, so that if you need to draw it in self-defense, you will also be dealt a mortal wound to yourself. Don't worry, it's going to be poisoned, so you're going to, wherever your sting is going to know it, but don't do it lightly." "Oh, thank you, great Jupiter," said the bee, who really wasn't hoping for that, more some way to stop people licking her honey. But nevertheless, she down the mountain to find her sisters, her other honeybees, and they were all looking quite confused with these daggers that they now woke up with. The bee explained what had happened, and well, the rest of the bees were sort of quite happy about that, but not as happy as Juno, who knew that, well, these bees had never waged war on anybody, but they now had a way to defend themselves, and also a way to make sure that nobody would take their honey without really valuing it. So, just a very small story there, and you may recognise that story, which is a Roman story, a story of how the bee got its sting, popularised later on by Aesop. It's one of Aesop's fables. But he, like so many good storytellers, and like, dare I say myself, has stolen it from other people that came before him. But bees are not what I want to talk to you about. What I want to talk to you about is their greatest king, as the king walked these lands. I don't mean King Red Wolf. I don't mean King Alfred. I don't mean King William the Conqueror, or even that the guy who was in here a moment ago with all the fur and the many wives. No, I do of course mean Uther Pendragon. Uther Pendragon was one of the finest warriors that had ever been built. He was tall, he was strong, he was really good at doing the things that kings are meant to do, by which I mean beating up neighbouring kings and taking their stuff. He built an alliance of other great kings, by which I mean great big guys with axes and swords that were good at taking people's stuff. And he was happy. He thought he was really happy, so he would invite all his closest friends, his allies, his supporters, to join him in a celebration. And they came to his castle at Tintagel, and they had meat, and they had drink, and they had, oh, hang on, who's this? The new bride of my ally, the Prince of Cornwall. Oh, suddenly Uther saw something that he wanted even more than gold and gems and swords, and that was his friend's wife. Now, this was something of a problem, but not something that can't be overcome between reasonable people. So he took his friend and ally off, and they had a free and frank exchange of views that led to the Prince of Cornwall, of course, pushing Uther Pendragon away and slapping him around the face. Storming away, he was absolutely outraged. Other people had seen this. They asked what had happened, and Uther, being a bold, a honest, an upfront man, said, "That traitor has declared that he should be king of all the Britons, not me. We ride at dawn to destroy his fortress." And at dawn, they did ride. They rode south, following the prince as he made his way back to Cornwall, arriving just as his army was being summoned, and the two armies met in glorious battle, by which I mean lots of people were killed, and it was really, really violent. As the dust settled, well, Uther thought, I'm not sure that the now widow Princess of Cornwall is really going to appreciate me coming in. And Merlin, who was one of his clear advisors, said, I've got a suggestion for you, Your Majesty. I could ensorce them so you look like her husband. That's not at all creepy or weird. Well, okay, you say it's not creepy or weird, Uther replied, well, you are, after all, very old with a very long beard, so you must be right. All that I require to do this is that if you happen to have a son from this union, which is really unlikely, obviously, that you give him to me for safekeeping. Don't worry, you'll get him back. Country will get him back. He'll be safe, he'll be safe. Well, okay, said Uther, because he's never really wanted to think through the consequences of his actions. Sounds good to me. And you're sure it's not creepy? It's not at all creepy? Cool. Yeah, make me look like my former ally that I've just killed so that I can go and seduce his wife. There's nothing creepy or weird about this. Well, nothing creepy or weird happened, and a lovely night was had by Uther. Less lovely by his Now, Paramore, when she woke up to discover that she was a widow, and the person she spent the night with was in fact the man that had killed her husband, but this isn't a story of romance, this is a story of kings. Months passed, she became great with child, and after the birth of the child, Merlin turned up and said, "Congratulations, it's a boy. Can I take him now, or do you want to say goodbye first?" It has to be said, this is not a story that is very kind to the Lady Graham, the Princess of Cornwall. After some recrimination, after some harsh words spoken to Uther, who after all was only trying to be romantic in the most creepy way possible, Merlin took the child and carried him away. Carried him to Sir Ector. Now Ector was not a great lord of the country. He was not a baron. He didn't have great castles or huge followings of men. What Ector had was a reputation for honesty and honour. He also had a lovely, really impregnable little castle on a rocky outcrop, and his wife was a giantess, and his son was half giant. So it seemed like a pretty safe place to leave the Crown Prince of the Britons. So Ector took in the little babe. Now, compared to Ector's natural son, Sir Kai, he was always quite small. He was called Squirt, he was called Wart, he was called Carrot, because he had the unfortunate red hair. But it was always meant in jest. It was always meant in comfort, because Kai, this is the early version of the story, where Kai is a good person, and Kai would look after little Wart, little Squirt, and raised him, as did his father, in the trappings of a knight, ready to earn his living with sword, with the strength of his arm. Although, what was quite weird to Kai was that little Squirt, little Arthur as he was called, but he couldn't become as tall as the tallest tree in the forest, and he couldn't be struck through with a wound that would be mortal to anybody else and just wake up in the morning perfectly fine. And he couldn't drink a barrel of ale as big as an ox and just be fine. So he did feel quite protective of this otherwise quite weak and pathetic little, just normal human person. Well, it was a fairly idyllic childhood for Arthur, really, all things being told. For Uther, it was less idyllic, because he was the king of the Britons. He had a great army, he had a war band of heroes, and by heroes I mean great big people with swords and axes and spears and very little in the way of morality. But also, he had a Saxon problem. This race of men started coming into the edges of his kingdom, started nibbling away at the land, taking the treasure, burning the abbeys, and just basically being a real pain. Now, Uther came up with a plan so cunning that nobody could possibly see through it. He would split his forces. He, with a few of his bodyguard, would be surrounded by riches, gold, the accumulated wealth of the kingdoms in a big clearing in the forest. And then when the Saxons came to attack them, oh, it would look desperate. It would look terrible for Uther, until his allies, his friends that were hiding in the forest around, came and surrounded the Saxons, and they would destroy them. There is no way it could possibly go wrong. There's been no treachery so far in this story. At no point has any ally turned on any other ally. There is no forewarning here. Well, Uther gathered together his best men, and they gathered together gold and jewels and silks and satins, and they piled them in a clearing in the middle of the forest. And around the edges of the forest were concealed all his allies, men from Wales and Cornwall, men from the north, men from the south, men from Essex, men from Wessex, and they waited. They waited for the Saxon horde, the great Saxon army, to descend upon them, and when they did, Uther and his men, they grabbed on their war gear, they put on their helmets, they drew their swords, and they rode out to meet them, realising they were heavily outnumbered. There's no way they could win. until Uther took his great war horn, doo-doo! And from the forest emerged nothing. Well, never one to be discouraged by an apparent hiccup, Uther drew in a great breath and doo-doo! Maybe they hadn't heard him. Doo-doo! Doo-doo! His allies slunk away from the forest, leaving Uther and his men to be ridden down, to be chopped down one by one until only Uther remained, bleeding from a dozen cuts. He had his great sword Caliban in both his hands, the royal sword of the Britons. He faced first one Saxon, then another, realizing that there was no way he could possibly win. He took his sword, he reversed it, and he thrust it deep into the ground, sundering a piece of marble. And he said in a loud and clear voice, "This sword can only be drawn forth from the earth by the one true king of the Britons." And then, just as he was about to call down a curse on those that betrayed him, those that left him to die, and those that struck the final blow was struck, and he was no more, dead at the foot of a stone, sundered through with the royal sword. Well, the royal sword was a great treasure, and one by one the Saxons tried to pull it forth, but it wouldn't budge. Some of the former allies of Uther that they'd been plotting with came forward and they tried. The sword would not budge. Over the following months and years, the greatest heroes, lords, kings, peasants, people coming on holiday on a package tour from the continent, they all tried and nobody could make it shift. Eventually a small church was erected by the stone, but over the years people forgot about it. In fact, they forgot about it for 16 years. And after 16 years, the great lords of the country, now beset by Saxons, now including some Saxons, called everybody together for a tournament. Whilst the tournament was going on, the great lords were going to discuss who should be in charge, who should rule Britain, the land of the Britons, and what should we do about these Saxons? Should we just accept that they're here now, or should we gather together for one final battle to throw them out? Well, a lot of the great lords turned up, but so too did the barons and the minor lords and the knights, and actually just pretty much anybody that wanted a good day out, because there was no television in those days, so they had to find something to entertain themselves with. On the third day, there was a joust, and the joust was magnificent. Great war horses coming together at the speed of steam engines, lances shattering on shields, helmets being riven apart. On the fifth day, there was a tournament on foot, and it was to this tournament that Kai and Ector had signed up. They brought along the squire, the war, the carrot top, young Arthur to be their squire. He was a young man really now, 16 or 17 years of age. He was somewhat skilled in arms, but not yet a knight. Well, Kai and Ector, they were amongst the greatest swordsmen of the land. Ector was through to the third round. In the second bout that Kai had, he ended up splitting his shield. He split his enemy's shield until, with a final great overhand blow, he took the helmet off his enemy, but also broke his sword blade. Well, the judges gave him a win on style, tactics, and aggression, but he did have to get a sword for the next round, otherwise he would be disqualified. Oh no, said Kai. Well, look, I haven't got my spare sword with me. It's back at the lodgings. Arthur, you're quick. I'm wearing all this armour. I'm going to be too slow. Run back to the lodging house, get my spare sword. And Arthur said, yes, of course, Kai, no problem. And do you know what? He was quick. He zoomed through. He went down the alley, over the wall, through the field, round the back, cut through the graveyard, and would you know, the hotel was closed? Because it turns out everybody was in town to watch the tournament. No matter how many doors he tried, how many windows he tried, Arthur could not get in. Until he remembered, when he cut through the graveyard, he seen a sword, like a tomb or a monument or something, that had it was in like a tombstone in a rock. Well, I mean, it looked pretty new, it looked pretty shiny, so if he could borrow that sword, that would be fine. And he cut back to the graveyard and he thought, oh, it's really buried in there, it's not going to come out. And shing, straight out, no problem. Oh, brilliant, said Arthur. And it's really sharp, it's great. Kai will love this. Ran back to Kai, just as he was about to be called on, didn't have time to look at it. Brilliant, thank you, said Kai. Put it, sword away in his scabbard, got his spear, got his shield, came out. And the bout was everything you could have wanted for. There was aggression, there was tactics, there was pure skill, speed, and the spears broke, the shields broke. Both men drew their swords and wait! Echoed a voice from the stones. Where did you get that sword from? Kai was wearing a big bucket helmet at this point. You couldn't really see very much. He assumed that this was his spare sword. This is my mother's sword. Given to me through my father, said Kai. Except it was all muffled because he was wearing a big bucket helmet. Take your helmet off, boy, we can't hear you. So he put his sword away, took his helmet off. He said, it's my mother's sword, given to me through my father. No, that is the sword of the Britons. If that is your sword, then you must be the true king of the Britons. Everybody kneel to Kai, king of the Britons. Now, Kai just looked confused at this point, because he didn't realise that the qualifications needed to be king were to be able to grow as tall as the tallest tree in the forest, and to be able to drink a vat of beer as big as an ox, and to wake up in the morning having had a deadly wound the night before, just feeling fine. And then he looked down and he said, oh, no, this isn't my sword. Arthur, where did you get this sword from? Oh, please, sir, I found it. It was in a churchyard, just buried in a rock. I didn't think anyone would mind. I was going to put it back afterwards. I'm ever so sorry, sir. Who is this boy that has brought this sword from this stone? My name's Arthur, sir. I'm sometimes called Walt, or sometimes called Squirt, or sometimes called Carrot Top, because I've got this ginger hair. Prove that you can do this. What you said, it's impossible. And they went to the grave. Kai gave the sword back. It went into the stone. Well, hang on. Let's see the boy do it. And Arthur went up and with two hands simply drew the sword from the stone. Oh, easy, said one of the lords. Now that it's been drawn from the sword, and clearly it wasn't by him, because no skinny teenage boy can possibly do anything worthwhile. Well, now that it's been drawn from this stone, anybody can draw it forth. Put it back in, boy, and Arthur did as he was instructed. And Uriens, king of the Orkney Isles, confidently pulled on the sword, and then less confidently pulled on the sword. Then got up on top of the stone, pulling as hard as he could, and it wouldn't budge. He got pushed on. Another king tried, another lord tried, a baron, and the greatest warriors that were assembled, none could shift it. Until Arthur pulled forth the sword from the stone once more. And one by one, the kings and lords and barons and knights, and all of the people who gathered to watch, went down on one knee. Behold Arthur, king of the Britons!
And here is the tomb of Geoffrey Chaucer in Westminster Abbey, the father of English literature. And Geoffrey Chaucer was buried in what would later become known as Poets' Corner, and as such, he was the first poet to be buried there. And this is his tomb, a picture I took a few years ago when I was doing a tour of the Abbey. Now that concludes our Barking Medieval Festival. But next week you'll join me back at St Margaret's Church for its open day, and you'll get a tour of the church and you'll get to see and hear some lovely things. So I'll see you all then. Hope you've all enjoyed the series so far, and wishing you all a good weekend. Take care everyone, and I'll see you all soon.